November 2021. The world was going into a second winter lockdown during the pandemic. That sucked, but at least Star Trek Discovery Season 4 would drop to get us through it. But a week before it aired, Paramount announced that it would not drop in a lot of territories, among them my territory. They were going to launch a new platform somewhere in 2022, and all of Star Trek would migrate there, so they would not allow Netflix anymore to have this content, as it was before with seasons 1 to 3. I think that was an absolute disgrace, a total contrast to Gene Roddenberry's vision. Discrimination because of the pursuit of wealth. Now, 2.5 years later, we finally get to see Disco Season 4. And forgive me that I'm not leaping with excitement. This is the Review of Champions, and I'm your host, Grandmaster. With me is a powerful panel made up of the finest champions Sakar has to offer. Let me introduce them to you. First up, the man with the plan, the man with the hat, Mr. Taylor first. How are you doing, man?
I'm good.
That's always great to hear. Showing his beautiful face on camera, as always, Mr. Merv. How are you, man?
Fantastic.
And last but certainly not least, voice only, the grand old lady of the podcast of champions, Lokismom. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing wonderful,
That's also good to hear. This is episode 3 of the Star Trek project, in which we will be reviewing Star Trek, all of it, in order of release, sort of. Today we're going to talk about Star Trek, the original series, season 3. But before we do, I want to ask you all to help us out. Like and share this video, and by subscribing to our channel. And if you really can't get enough of us, you can join our ranks. Go to Sakar at sakar.freeforums.net, set up an account, get to know us, and yes, you can join us in our reviews or podcast, even on the Star Trek project. We would love to have you on the show. As mentioned before, we will be discussing the 24 episodes of season 3 of Star Trek, the original series today. So let's dive right into it. And we will start with our new section, and that section is called Grandmaster's Picks. And this time I picked the following 3 episodes, and I'm going to ask the panel to review those. I picked The Enterprise Incident, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, and All Our Yesterdays. And I'm going to start with Taylor. Taylor, let's hear it. What did you think of these 3 episodes?
I loved all 3 of these episodes. Real quick, if memory serves, during season 2, the network actually announced that Star Trek was being canceled. However, there was a massive letter writing campaign that convinced them to renew it for a new season. Unfortunately, in their infinite wisdom, they cut the budget. So it shows a little bit in this season. But they actually found some creative ways to keep the storytelling fantastic, even with lower budgets. And a lot of the episodes in season 3 I found to be a bit more cerebral than the first 2 seasons. And some of them were pretty complex. Some of them I think could have easily been stretched out to 2 episodes, double episodes or feature-length stories, because they were pretty complex, and sometimes they had to be rushed a little bit, I think. But as far as the 3 and your picks, Enterprise Incident is a great episode. It's intrigue, it's got the Romulans, delves more into the cloaking device and the whole idea of espionage and sabotage, and Kirk having to have plausible deniability in order to avoid a war between the Federation and the Romulans. Spock has a little romance in this one, unlike usual when it's usually Kirk. But Spock gets to have a little romance with the Romulan commander. And by the way, the Romulan women wear miniskirts too, so it was a universal fashion trend in the Star Trek universe. Even the Romulan women also wore miniskirts. But it's just a really great great episode all around, with great performances by all involved. Let that be their final battlefield. That was your second one, right?
Yeah, let it be your last battlefield. Yeah.
Your last battlefield. I love that episode. First of all, Frank Gorshin is just fantastic all the time. He, of course, played the Riddler in Batman '66, but he has many, many other great roles. He's also a fantastic stand-up comedian, and he's especially really great at doing impressions, celebrity impressions. So he's a multi-talented guy. But in this, of course, he plays a serious role, and of course, the whole the whole idea of these two characters, Loki and I can't remember what
Bella.
yeah, Commissioner, whatever his name was, um, being these bicolored characters, and it was just so impactful. It's such a simple idea and just so impactful. I especially love the scene where Frank Gorshin explains to Kirk and Spock, why Loki is inferior, and they're like, "But you're the same." And he's like, "Are you blind? I am black on the right side. Loki is white on the right side."
Yeah.
And then the way Kirk and Spock just look at each other and react to it, is priceless. How stupid.
Yeah, and quite obvious, of course, what it's hinting at, of course.
Yeah, obviously, but it does it in such a great and clever way, in such an entertaining way, to show the world, how silly, prejudice and all this stuff is. And I also loved how, they spent a lot of time of the two characters stating their cases, and they both had, compelling arguments and were true believers in what they believed in. And I like that. We got to hear both sides, and it wasn't a forget the pun, black and white issue. The only thing that bothered me, and it's really just something that always struck me weird about that episode. They mentioned that they had been chasing each other for 50,000 years. Why such an absurdly long time? I just don't understand why the writers went that way. They could have said 20 years. They could have said 100 years. They could have said 10 years, and it wouldn't have changed the story at all. But to think that their civilization hadn't changed at all in 50,000 years just seemed really weird. And I have the same thing sometimes with Lord of the Rings, where they say all this stuff happened 10,000 years ago. Really? I mean, we've gone from caves to flying to the moon in less than 10,000 years, and nothing has changed in Middle Earth in 10,000 years. But anyway,
it's a simple fact, which I always think is amazing. Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than actually to the building of the pyramids. But that's another story. Yeah, so there's time for you. But the 50,000 years is probably giving them enough time to destroy a complete planet or something like that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's a great episode, and it's just a ton of fun. Now, I'm kind of surprised you picked All Our Yesterdays, I believe is the name of the title, which is like the second to the last episode. But I like that episode a lot. They go down to this planet that's about to be destroyed, find out that all the inhabitants have left through time, through this strange time machine, in this library, and of course they accidentally go through. And of course, the part where Kirk goes to like a Renaissance fair type era of time when they think he's a witch and stuff. That's pretty interesting. But I think the more interesting part is Bones and Spock, who go into a Stone Age era, and they meet Marriott Hartley living in a cave in her fur bikini, and she's a great actress, so I'm glad she was there.
Yeah, and that in freezing temperatures, by the way.
Yes.
That hot spring must really be hot.
Yeah. But she was a great actress. She went on to a lot of other things, including pretending to be James Garner's wife in a whole bunch of commercials in the I believe the 70s and 80s. But that's another story. But anyway, but of course, what they find out is because they didn't go through the preparation prior to the portal, that their minds are affected, their bodies are affected, and they can't actually survive there. And of course, we see that Spock he's reverting back to a more emotional state, a previous, more primitive state of Vulcans.
And he has a little romance again.
And he falls in love with Marriott Hartley, and almost kills Bones because he loses control. Again, all very, very clever and well done. And of course, they manage to escape and get out, and Mr. Atos makes it through alive. So and they get out just in time before the thing. So, but again, just a clever episode. I mean, I couldn't write any of these things. real quick, speaking of writing, because I don't think anyone was going to talk about this particular episode, The Lights of Zatar, I believe the episode is called, which is one of those cerebral episodes I was talking about. Very, very, very high concept sci-fi. But I just wanted to mention that if you noticed in the credits for that, one of the writers, the co-writer of 2 for that episode was Sherry Lewis. And if you guys probably aren't old enough to recognize that name, but she was a very famous ventriloquist, puppeteer, children's television star, perennial celebrity guest star on game shows for many, many years. And apparently also a part-time sci-fi writer. And she wrote a pretty darn good story, I think, for The Lights of Zatar. But yeah, those are my thoughts on your picks.
Thank you. Lokismom, as we mentioned before in this series, you watched it all when it aired back in the day. Season 3, these episodes, can I have your thoughts?
Yes. I'll sort of go backwards. All our yesteryears. That was just a fun episode, and you know how they would do stuff, and it would just sometimes it would just be so campy. And there's like the scene where she's got that fur coat on, then all of a sudden she just drops it. She's in her boudoir. She's got the bikini, the leather bikini on.
For the record, I didn't pick this episode because of the bikini. I picked it because of the name of the librarian, which is funny to me because it's A to Z, Athos. Yeah, so that's why. But go on about bikini, by the way.
Yeah, I just thought, like you say, that was just what they did on TV back then. I mean, they still do, but it's, cheesecake and beefcake and stuff like that. So it's, it's all done in fun and nobody gets hurt and stuff like that. So, I think most people are okay with it nowadays. Spot got to be a little more romantic. I mean, actually, in a lot of these episodes, I think he got to be a little bit more come out of his shell type deal and jump right back in. Probably that one. That's another one of those shows that where they like, how in the world did this planet way on the other side of the galaxy have the same history of the Earth? But anyway, but there again, it's sort of, you kind of almost have to think in terms of Star Trek. Kind of has a little bit of a comic book flavor to it, sort of the absurd to it. You sort of have to take it on that level as opposed to like a more hard science fiction level. The one with let's see, yes, The Last Battlefield, which I thought was hilarious because the black guy on the right side is what's the very opening scene there? They're chasing him in a stolen car, basically. So we know where he's at in the dynamic already. And then that whole scene where he's sort of laying there, sort of unconscious, and like I think, where they're just talking about him. Well, what is he? Well, I don't understand this. They're just like totally perplexed by that. I've never seen a race like this before. And the actor Lou Antonio plays the part, and then where you monocolored people. It's just you have to remember that this is 1969, and when I first saw it, a lot of that stuff just went over my head when I was a kid. But seeing it now and looking back to that era, it's just really, just very, very entertaining to me. I just thought it was almost hilarious, that episode. It kind of got a little toward the end. It kind of got this, I don't know, they were just doing the same thing over and over again. I think sort of by the last part of the episode, it really wasn't that great, but otherwise, the whole concept was fabulous, and what got said between the two characters. And of course, there's Loki. That was unusual that they were almost Loki, but not quite. And then the
Enterprise incident.
The Enterprises, yes. Now this one really kind of, because we were talking about a couple months ago about how pushing buttons behind Captain Kirk. Well, as the show did progress over the 3 seasons, you did have they were letting women step up into the important parts. So that, of course, the whole thing had to be set up with a female commander for Spock to have this little romance with her. But even so, it was kind of they even did it, when she spun around in the chair, you wasn't expecting to see a woman there. Of course, now they do Star Trek they're producing now, that joke wouldn't go over, But anyway, but yeah,
Now, if they spin the chair and there's a man, it's actually
yeah.
quite
Well, in
surprising.
'69, that would have been oh wow, they got a woman, that was impressive. But yeah, the one thing though I did want to about that, when I thought really at the very end, and I just caught it, Spock actually has to go in there and prostitute himself out a little bit, because he has to divert her attention while Captain Kirk accidentally, pretends to die and then comes back with with his, and that's where he has his Romulan makeup. And but they do the whole hand thing. Well, when we're seeing that hand stuff going on, that's Vulcan sex right there. So we actually got to see some naughtiness going on in this episode. And
Again, I didn't pick it for that reason.
No, of course not, of course. But then, at the very end, where she realized she's captured and she's going to have to go as a prisoner, and she says something. Well, was it your choice? Was it your choice to do that? And he said, yes, it was my choice. And I thought that was very unusual for a woman to ask a male character, a female character ask a male character, put it that way. Well, was you coerced into doing this? In a sense, did you whore yourself out to do this? And he said, no, I wanted to do this. So, I thought that was just very, very forward thinking, very advanced for 1969.
Yeah, the writers of Star Trek in the 1960s were very, very clever. We already have pointed it out many, many times. We wouldn't be complete if I didn't give Merv a chance to give his thoughts on these 3 episodes.
And here they are.
Oh.
So I'll just go, since we went forward to back, I'll just go right back up. The Enterprise incident. I have to mention that this is the 2nd episode of the season. The first episode of the season was Spock's Brain, and I hated Spock's Brain. I was so bored with Spock's Brain. I fell asleep 3 times trying to watch it. Like, I could not have asked for a worse episode. And then it follows it up. So I was worried coming into season 3, because it's the first time I've ever seen any of this. So I'm like, oh, that opening episode it wasn't like season 2 where you had a muck time. You had Spock's Brain is not a muck time, not even close. But the Enterprise incident followed it up magnificently. I thought it was fantastic. In a lot of the stuff that I wound up thinking about afterwards was like the Enterprise crew and the Federation aren't really presented in the best light in this episode. Like, if you take a step back and look at it from the full context, like Spock manipulates a female to get this secrecy, and the whole they're basically tricking the Romulans into giving up secret technology against their will. They're basically, it's Cold War, height of the Cold War and all that stuff, and they're just
It's a heist.
Yeah, it's a heist. The Romulans are, for whatever else they may be, they're kind of oblivious to it here. And I mean, they're suspicious naturally because they're not on good terms or whatever, but they're generally like straightforward. And it's the crew of the Enterprise who are being deceptive and kind of going behind the backs and doing a lot of villainous, kind of activity that if you didn't know them, if we hadn't spent 2+ seasons with them already, like you'd think like, are these the good guys? Should I be cheering for these people? Like, they're manipulating people left and right, and they're tricking them and they're stealing stuff. And it's just like, what did this turn into?
Well,
but
actually, I want to make a comment on that, because in later Star Trek, which you will find out later, it isn't like this. The United Federation is like a peaceful, almost, well, Mary Sue, Gary Stu kind of empire compared to the others. But we already noticed that with the Klingons as well. In I think it was episode 1 of our series that in the 1960s the other empires and the Federation were much more nuanced. They had much more variety of what they were doing. It's not like good guys versus bad guys. It was more like there are two sides to every coin. I think I actually enjoy that a lot more than what we get later, where the Federation is portrayed as pure good overall. There are some exceptions, but and I really enjoyed it. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't say all that to say that made the episode less interesting or anything like that. Like I found it one of the best episodes of the season because of like the nuance and this is kind of a different coat that we're not used to seeing some of these characters wear, or at least, in a general sense of like, are they doing morally, because some episodes they have the moral high ground, there's an obvious situation where they're trying to do the best thing possible, but this feels like not one of them. It may be the best thing for the Federation, but it's not like broadly general, broadly good, I guess is I don't know how to put it the right way, but I'm trying to get to.
This nuance will come back in Deep Space Nine, but we will get only a Deep Space Nine somewhere end of 2025 or something. So
yeah, I very much look forward to it.
Yeah.
The second one, which was the last, Let This Be My Last Battlefield or something like that, probably was my favorite of this whole season. Which I didn't expect coming in, because you see the sideways face paint and you're just like, I don't know. There was some part of me that was just like, this is going to be a dumb episode, but I wound up loving it. I loved the whole, almost the Enterprise is like a background character for these two people representing their societies going at war. They're constantly after each other, trying to get one over or whatever. There's a particular scene where I think the two characters are arguing and they're both facing each other and all the crew is over here. In the way that they're seeing it, they look identical because you can only see the dark side of one face and the dark side of the other, and you don't see any difference whatsoever. And I thought that was just a nice little touch of like, to everyone else, these people look the same, but to each other, they're vastly different. And I had a lot of fun with it. Plus, it reminded me of Roddy Piper, so that was great.
Yeah, I thought the episode was almost farce-like, where the Enterprise was used basically as a place where they were chasing each other and going from room to room and stuff like that. It was almost hilarious in some way.
Yeah, the Enterprise was like the backdrop for their episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like the rest of the crew could have just flies on the wall.
And actually, in this episode, the Federation, by of course Captain Kirk, takes the moral high ground by saying, "Hey, we're not taking sides here. We're bringing you both to the starbase, and you figure it out." Yeah. Whatever. Continue.
So yeah, that was probably my favorite episode of the whole season, and then I'm sorry, what was the last one?
All Our Yesterdays.
All Our Yesterdays. Yeah. I don't have many thoughts on it other than the bikini was nice. Probably the highlight for me was whenever McCoy says something to Spock when they're in like the cave or whatever. He calls him like a pointy-eared weirdo or something like that. And Spock loses his shit. And it's like one of the few times that you see Spock, because he's being manipulated or whatever. He's like losing his, cool, calm, and collect self or whatever. But I just loved it because, he'd probably destroy McCoy in a fight. We've seen Spock throw down quite a few times. And whenever he gets mad, like I was like, oh, this is a new twist. So that's probably the highlight of that episode for me, aside from the fur bikini, which makes sense in the, in an ice age.
Yeah. What can I say? Fig leaves are not available.
You wouldn't wear a lace bikini, obviously. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes sense. It's probably mammoth, mammoth fur.
There were no figs there, so figs.
I think it was leather. It was all leather, I believe. You need to go back and look at that.
No, that would be terrible to go back and look at it again. Anyway, Lokismom, now you're talking anyway. Did you pick an episode that you want to highlight in this season?
Yes, and it's got the hard title, so I need to read it off. Um, is there no is there no truth in beauty?
Is
Question mark.
I think it's officially is there in truth no beauty?
Oh yes, is there in truth no beauty? I couldn't read my own writing. Question mark. Yeah, this one. I picked it because it has a little bit more of well, Diana Moldow for one thing. She's in this episode again. She was in the previous season, and of course she
Yeah.
goes on and plays. Oh golly, I've forgotten her name, but she was the replacement doctor in the Next Generation for a season, I believe.
Catherine Pulaski, I think it was.
Yes, that's it. So anyway, I did pick this one. For one thing, I thought she was just so good in that. And again, it's another, I think, powerful woman character that, sort of, she has all this empathic and telepathic powers. And, of course, we find out that she's blind too, but that's, a side point. But she's, I was trying to. Well, I've lost my train of thought on that one. But anyway, again, Spock gets to, or Leonard Nimoy gets to come out of his Spock character and play the Talos, the Medusa character, which I guess is some sort of a plasma creature or something. And when it really got to the end, where the Talos, he's still in Spock's body, and so he sort of starts. Just a few moments, he sort of thinks about it, and he's really a character from he's sort of like a pure consciousness like character that sort of kind of can only barely communicate with humans or with biological creatures. And I thought that's very interesting because that's sort of kind of in the background, sort of going. I kind of follow UFO and that stuff. I'm not a UFO believer or anything like that. I simply follow the whole everything that's going down with it because I just find it fascinating. But anyway, that's sort of like something that some of the theorists or quote unquote theorists are talking about, that there may be plasma in some way may be creating some of these anomalies that we're seeing right now, the UAPs and stuff like that they're talking about. But anyway, getting back to the episode, yeah, I thought it was just very, very well done. Well acted. I will say just a quick shout out to the previous episode, the Enterprise incident that Joanna Linville plays the Romulan commander, and she just has on a bitching Diana Furstenberg dress there when she goes, "Let me slip into something more comfortable." She comes out with that dress. I just forgot to mention that, but yeah, that would be my pick episode for this season.
Okay. Merv, I'm going to ask you the same question. Did you pick an episode to discuss in this month's episode of the Star Trek Project?
I did. I went with the Spectre of the Gun.
That's actually the next episode from the one Lokismom was talking about.
I didn't even pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I asked the question, I don't remember if it was on camera or off camera, but Star Trek, this original series seems to go back in time to like world eras, World War II, Roman Empire, that sort of thing. And I asked the question, like, well, why don't they do Westerns? You'd think there'd be sets all over Hollywood or wherever in the 1960s, especially, like leftover sets that they could use just to film a couple of Western episodes. Well, we got them this season. So they stuck out. And I wouldn't call myself a history buff necessarily, but I love the American Wild West, like in the 1800s America. The stories of gunfighters and mountain men and stuff like that, they just all fascinate me. Native American tribes. I can't get enough of that kind of stuff. So when this episode started coming on and the crew essentially gets sent down, they encounter this like security drone light thing in space because they're heading towards some planet to make contact with, I don't remember the alien race or whatever, but there's this security thing flying around. It looks like a disco ball almost, like with a bunch of flashy colors. And it basically puts them to a test. And they find themselves on a planet or in an area. I'm not really sure, but it eventually, when the fog lifts, it's like this old west town in the 1800s, and they realize that they are playing the roles of some of the Clanton gang in Tombstone, Arizona, right before the events of the gunfight of the OK Corral, which is one of the most famous gunfights in Western lore, essentially, between the Earps and the Clanton gang, Clanton McClowrys. So I'm familiar with the story, and I feel like a lot of people are, because there's been a bunch of movies about it over the years. I guess one of the more recent ones would be Tombstone from the 1990s, which I've watched probably 6 dozen times. So yeah, immediately once I realized that that's the backdrop for this episode, I'm hooked. I'm in there, I'm invested. And there's some interesting twists here. The gunplay was especially a nice, not that there's not, the laser guns and stuff like that, but there was like an emphasis on gunplay in this episode, I felt like. So that was cool. I loved that they were portrayed as the cowboys in this scenario, which in pretty much any version I can think of, typically the Earps are the heroes. The Earps are the good guys, and the cowboys. There's a lot more nuance, especially in the real life, But usually in the movies, we sympathize more with the Earps than we do with the Clanton McClowry gang. So to see them in the role of, traditionally the villain in this scenario, I thought it was really interesting, especially because they made all the townsfolk also like scared of the Earps and like kind of siding with the Clantons. So that was like a really interesting take on this whole situation that, I've seen in a bunch of different mediums. I've read about. It always goes this certain way, but that was like a really nice little twist to it, like seeing our heroes projected into the roles of what I'm traditionally familiarized with as the villain role in this scenario. So that was really interesting. I liked that Chekhov. It always seems like he there's like, you got your main core, and then Chekhov comes along and he always gets into trouble. I feel like he's always getting into trouble. So him getting killed surprised me. And then him not actually being dead also surprised me. I mean, I guess it didn't really surprise me. I knew he wasn't going to die, but like that, if there's a negative, that's almost the only thing, was like they portrayed this as him actually being dead, but he's not. So I don't really like fake out deaths, but it didn't really bother me because I'm sure they would explain it away somehow. And they explained it as he was just so infatuated with the woman that he didn't really think about him being dead. So, so that was pretty fun. But yeah, this episode, and then I guess in a tandem with I'm sorry, I can't remember the title. What was the other one?
I think you wanted to talk a little bit about the episode called The Paradise Syndrome.
The Paradise Syndrome. So that one, again, another kind of a Western-y vibe to it. It had like basically a Native American kind of backdrop where Kirk has amnesia, or for some reason, whatever reasons, and then he basically, it's like a Dances with Wolves scenario where he comes in and he meets a very skimmily dressed Pocahontas woman, and they of course hit it off, as every woman does when they're encountering Captain Kirk, and they live a nice little life until the planet's about to be destroyed, and they realize that Kirk isn't the god that they thought he was. So I just really like the backdrop of that, like the Native American kind of obvious influence there. I think they even mentioned several Native American tribes in the episode as inspiration for this group, or kind of a parallel of that group. So
American natives had
really
space travel and colonized.
Yeah. But yeah, I really liked both those episodes, and they were probably the most Western, American Old West themed episodes that I've come across so far. So they really stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm. Taylor, what is your pick or are your picks for this month's episode. And we can take a little sit now because now Taylor's going to talk.
Yeah, please indulge me for a moment. Follow up quickly on my last two guests here. The lake in the Paradise Syndrome is the Hollywood Reservoir off of Mulholland Drive. It's used in many, many movies and TV shows, including Combat and the Andy Griffith Show. Just side note. In there, is there in truth no beauty? Great use of fisheye lens when a crazy person is eye view of looking at something. Really creative use of fisheye lens there. And that's another one of those cerebral episodes I was talking about. Very, very thought-provoking episode, that one. Before I get into a couple episodes, and it's really hard to narrow down, before I get into a couple episodes I want to touch on, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of guest stars, if I may. In the episode Day of the Dove, which is a great episode with the Klingons and the swords, just fantastic. All right. But the Klingon commander, Kang, was played by Michael Ansara, who will come back in DS9 and in Voyager. He played many, many roles, including beginning in 1958, he starred in a Western series called Broken Arrow, where he played a Native American character who was the hero of the show. He also appeared in many other Western movies and TV shows, including one of my favorite movies called Only the Valiant, if you ever get a chance to see that one. But just some of his sci-fi and fantasy credits. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the movie and the TV series. Man from U.N.C.L.E., Girl from U.N.C.L.E., Lost in Space, Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, The Time Tunnel, Tarzan, the 1966 series, Land of the Giants, Mission Impossible, Day of the Animals, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Babylon 5, and he was the voice of Mr. Freeze in Batman the Animated Series and a whole bunch of other DC Animated Universe stuff. So this guy is like royalty. One other, real quick, Plato's Stepchildren, Michael Dunn, who played Alexander, the dwarf character in that. He was famed for playing Dr. Lovelace in the Wild Wild West series. He also played Mr. Big in the unaired pilot of Get Smart. He was also in Bonanza, Tarzan, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Burke's Law, Run for Your Life, and he was in a lot of horror movies, including Werewolf of Washington. And he was a concert pianist as a child before his growth issues prevented him from continuing that. So really talented man. Whom Gods Destroy. First of all, you had Lord Garth, played by Stephen Inhot, who was also in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Mission Impossible, and a lot of other shows. But I would be remiss if I did not mention Yvonne Craig, who played the Orion green dancing crazy woman. Best line in possibly in the entire season is, "He's my lover and I have to kill him." She, of course, played Batgirl in Batman 66. She was in 2 movies with Elvis Presley. She was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. She was in Land of the Giants, $6 Million Man, In Like Flint, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Wild Wild West. And she was also a accomplished ballerina in her own right. All right, now on to the shows I wanted to talk about.
Before you do,
quick, though.
Before you do, we have a follow-up from Loki's mom. Then you can start.
Yes, there was I think it's the Elion of Troyes, the episode. There was it might not be the episode he's in, but anyway, the actor by the name of Jay Robinson was, I believe he was in that. Of course, he's made up with a lot of white makeup. I think he's kind of a silly character, but he was in the movie The Robe. He played Caligula.
Yes.
In that 1950s big blockbuster, and then he played, I think, the sequel. He played the Emperor again. I think it was Demetrius in the Gladiator. Right after that, he just fell off the map because he had a very bad drug addiction, and whatever, got arrested. But then he managed to get his life turned around and whatnot, and eventually he got back into acting. And I think right around the 1960s, late 1960s, that's when he came back and started doing parts and whatnot. And you'd see him every once in a while. I think he did some kids' TV show, a morning show for a while. I can't remember the name of it, but
Dr. Shrinker.
I'm sorry?
It was Dr. Shrinker. It was a Sid and Marty Krofft Saturday morning show. He played Dr. Shrinker.
That's it. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But and things like that. And I just thought I would point that out because he did have like a landmark role to begin with, and probably maybe he could have had a really great career. One odd thing about him, if you ever see that movie, he's probably only about 22 in that movie. He really looked much older than what he was. So that had a lot to do with, I think, getting in trouble in Hollywood early on. But anyway, I just talking about comeback stories like we do sometimes with Robert Downey Jr. and guys like that. I thought that I'd just throw that one in there.
I think that was great. Taylor, now your episode.
Another one. I'm sorry, another one real quick. That Which Survives, Lee Merriweather, former Miss America, star of The Time Tunnel, and Barnaby Jones and many other shows, and former Catwoman in the Batman 66 movie. All right, now let's get to some episodes. The Way to Eden. Everyone laughs at this episode. In the late 1960s, though, every TV show had to do a hippie episode, okay? Because that was in the zeitgeist at the time. It was part of the culture, and everyone wanted to explore it. Most TV shows, however, took a comical look at it, treated it as a joke. Whereas this episode, The Way to Eden, was a very thoughtful episode. And I loved how Spock understood these people that were brought on board, the space hippies, for lack of a better term. He understood them. He respected some of their beliefs. He agreed with some of their beliefs, but not completely. But what this episode does is it points out the potential dangers of the hippie lifestyle, which is, kind of a stand to take on 1960s TV. Like I said, every show was treating it like a joke at this time. But it showed how like some vulnerable young people could fall into this life and end up hurting themselves or hurting others if they were taken advantage of by, in this case, the crazy doctor guy who was in charge of this group. And it's worth noting that this episode aired just a few months before the Manson murders took place, in which a group of hippies, a group of young people, were led astray by a crazy, cult leader type hippie guy. So it's kind of foreshadowing. It's kind of powerful. But a guest star in this episode, the hippie Adam, was played by Charles Napier. This was one of his first roles. He had a very long career playing the exact opposite of a hippie for the rest of his life. He played cops and rednecks and bureaucrats in movies like Rambo and Blues Brothers, and many other roles. Military guys. Exactly. He never played a hippie again after this role. I also love some of the musical numbers that the little concert the hippies put on the show, which of course was a distraction so they could take over the ship and get to Eden. But anyway, I thought it was a very thoughtful episode, and I liked the way, like I said, they kind of explored the hippie culture. They didn't completely tear it down. Like I said, Spock had respect for it. He understood some of their beliefs and some of the reasoning behind it, and they were against. They felt that modern civilization and modern technology and stuff was damaging to the human soul, basically, for just to paraphrase how they explained it. So again, it was very thoughtful and well balanced episode. I thought at a time, like I said, when most TV shows just thought hippies were a joke because they talked funny and they dressed funny and they had funny hair and stuff like that. Right. And the other episode I want to mention is The Savage Curtain, another episode that people laugh at. And yes, the rock creature does look like something from Lost in Space. But there's actually a lot said in this episode and a lot of universe building that comes later, because in addition to Abraham Lincoln, we see Sarek of Vulcan, who of course we will hear about in the future. And we see Kales of Klingon, who we will hear a whole lot about when we explore Klingon culture in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and so on. So I think that's pretty fascinating that those two characters showed up. But a lot of stuff is said in this episode, okay, because the alien wants to explore good versus evil. Very black and white, and they don't understand it. So they pit these two sides against each other. And we see Sarek tries to be a pacifist, which again was very popular in 1969 pop culture, hippies and so on, peace movement. He tries to be a pacifist. He goes there, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to go there and talk to him. And what happens to him? He gets killed. They kill him. And what does Abraham Lincoln say? Abraham Lincoln gives a whole speech about how, I gave orders that sent 100,000 men to their deaths against their brothers. And we don't want war, but when it comes to us, we have to be just as brutal and as ferocious as our enemies. Because the only good thing in war is to end it as quickly as possible. Right? Not peace movement rhetoric at that point. And then, of course, the final kicker at the end of the difference between good and evil, the monster still doesn't understand, but he says, what did you offer those guys if they killed us? He said, well, what they wanted, power. He said, well, you offered me the lives of my people. Light bulb goes off literally there were light bulbs going off in the rock creature's head, but that was the costume. But yes, you know what? He's kind of understood it a little bit more then. So again, I just thought that it's really an interesting episode, especially in the context of, 1960s television and the world in which it occurred. And the fact that very oftentimes Star Trek, would be on the, progressive or liberal side of things oftentimes in the context of its time. In the context of its time, but much more nuanced and two-sided in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I would even call it socialists at certain moments. But anyway, that's maybe a bridge too far.
And I'm not going to get into this episode, but I just want to give one shout out to one other episode, and that was the Cloud Binders, because I just think that's such a fun episode with a city in the cloud, like in Empire Strikes Back, and the miners and the artsy fartsy intellectuals up top who think they're superior, so they can make all the decisions for the worker bees down on the ground. Another great episode. So again, I could talk about all the episodes, but those are the ones I wanted to touch on today. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're most welcome. Thank you for that. Merv, when I was preparing myself for this month's episode of the Star Trek Project, I was reading on Wikipedia the plots. I've seen the episodes, but just read up on them to refresh yourself and stuff like that. And on Wikipedia, they also have a section on almost every episode where it says reception and critiques and stuff like that. And what I noticed was that a lot of the season 3 episodes are ranked among the worst of the original series. And I must admit, I like season 1 and 2 better than season 3. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying it's different, as Taylor already pointed out earlier. What are your thoughts on that? You are new to Star Trek. You've just seen season 1, 2, and 3. Lost your Star Trek virginity. And, well, do you agree with that assessment that is quite obvious? Or do you say, nah, the quality overall remains the same, it's just that it's a different type, like Taylor said?
I will say, just as somebody who never saw this before, there are a few things that taken myself out of, like, I guess today's TV culture and trying to plot myself into yesteryear's TV culture. The lack of like real continuity is just a big thing that's different now. I know, like, I guess outside of comedy shows and stuff like that, I mean, even now, like, I feel like almost every TV show has like these overarching, they don't necessarily have to drive the plot, but there's stuff that is overarching, whereas this really does feel episodic. And some episodes really grab a hold of you, and other episodes don't necessarily. And that's kind of the nature of it. And it's not, there's a lot of shows that are episodic even nowadays. But like, that's kind of my personal problem with like episodic television is that some of them just don't work, or fall flat, or there's not as much to write home about it. Even if they're still entertaining, it might not be as much. But then the same thing happens in continuous overarching storylines. Like if we ever wanted to do one on The Walking Dead, like I could go for days about how nothing happens right here and all the good stuff is out here as far as the season goes. But when it comes to like these Star Trek seasons, season 3, I definitely think for me some of the episodes really kind of blended together as far as like, you know, some of the more, like Taylor said, cerebral stories, just some of them hit. Like I actually really like The Lights of Zatar, which I did this thing when I was watching, at least with season 3, maybe even earlier, where after I watched an episode, I went and looked up like what some kind of a rating system, like what fans thought or what somebody voted on, or, you know, almost like an IMDb score or whatever. But of the stuff that I found, like, you know, I remember when I finished The Lights of Zatar, I was like, I kind of enjoyed this episode like quite a bit. And then I looked and it's like a 1 out of 5 on all these ratings. And I'm like, oh, I didn't really understand what happened there. But, you know, again, I think part of its mood and other things like that. And it's not necessarily, I could watch it again and, you know, or watch episodes I didn't like again, and maybe it'd be a totally different experience. I think that's just the nature of TV. But
of all media, in the end,
Yeah.
this weekend are the Oscars, and awards for art are the most stupid thing ever, because if something is good, it always is subjective to the moment, to your mood, to to even if you slept well, if you had a good meal or not, etc. So I mean, it's always subjective, and so yeah, if you rewatch an episode, it could hit you all of a sudden, or a one that hit you all of a sudden doesn't click anymore. That can happen. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I definitely think, like, it just as a general first time viewing, season 2 felt the strongest to me out of the 3 seasons. But all the episodes that we talked about, with the exception of the ones that we talked about negatively, I really enjoyed in this season 3. I've even enjoyed a few more that didn't get brought up, that I can't think of the titles right now, but I know there was more. But you know, they're in there. I just think maybe some of the ones that fall flat for the most people, that's where it tends to get a bad rap, would be my guess. But
Taylor, your thoughts on this?
I think there were definitely some differences in the third season, and then maybe it was jarring for some people. Now, like I said, I grew up watching the show in reruns 5 days a week, so the seasons meant nothing to me. They all blended together. And like I said, you can tell as an adult now looking back, you can tell that there are some budget cuts in this episode. But like I said, I don't think that affected the story writing very much. I like many episodes this season. There's a couple there's none that I actually dislike. There's a couple that I just never cared about. Just never had any impact on me. Fox Brain being one. Spectre the Gun for me I never gave it a second thought ever after watching it. It was just okay, got it. But overall, though, I think the quality, and like I said, some of the writing I think got a little bit more. I don't want to say adult per se, but a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more in depth to it, a little bit more sci-fi, harder sci-fi, I would guess, less of the, laser battles and stuff. So maybe that is why some people don't care as much for the third episode, but for me, it works fine. I mean, I love all three seasons, excuse me.
Okay. Loki's Mom?
Well, when I first episodic, as it were, or as it was, back then, all TV shows were like that. I can't even think of anything that was like that other than when they were the British TV shows like Upstairs, Downstairs, and things like that. They began showing those, and I think that sort of started that trend a little later on. But yeah, I mean, season 3, not a lot there for me, to tell you the truth. I mean, a lot of they're still entertaining and whatnot, but as far as just, with the exception of the Enterprise incident, a few others, I mean, that I thought were really had the writing and had the stuff to it. I guess, like Taylor said, the budget cuts and whatnot that affected it, and You know, it was a sad way for it to go out. You know, they could have had the money and got the right time spot and whatnot. Maybe that show could have lasted another couple of years. But you know, it went right into syndication. I mean, I think within a few years of the maybe the next year. I don't. Maybe 1970. I'll just a little funny thing. When I first saw Star Trek, I saw it in black and white. So everything was sort of set up back then for how analog televisions were. Um, and something we sort of talked about offline last month was how they have this high definition version has really changed the experience for me because the special effects just really weren't that even back then they really weren't that good. I mean, but 2001 had came out or was coming out, so that very sharp, far more crystal clear type vision that Kubrick had that became the model going forward. So Star Trek really looked antiquated, but they have digitalized it now, and then they have also beefed up all the special effects like the planets and the spaceships and all that. That all looks really good, and it didn't look all that great, 60 years ago. I just thought I'd put that in there.
Yeah. Is that a good thing or not? I wonder. Taylor, you had a follow-up.
Yeah, real quick, couple things. Another episode that always I never cared about was Requiem for Methuselah. And it always, just because it always struck me as so strange that Kirk fell madly in love with this robot girl in like an hour. And he couldn't live without
They had to add
her.
a lot of love stories
Well,
this season.
I'm just curious how many Kirk children there actually are running around in the Star Trek universe.
I'm glad you brought that up because I actually thought about it. I checked. Now, there are some suggestions of him having sex, but as far as him explicitly having sex in the original series, it was only twice. The Indian girl while he had amnesia, who he was married to, and the super fast girl in Wink of an Eye, who he was distracting with sex. Those are the only two times. I mean, you can say it was pretty obvious that he had sex with the Roman slave girl in season 2, but he only explicitly said it twice, that he actually had sex. He had lots of romancing.
Mm-hmm.
But and another thing I want to mention real quick about the continuing stories. In fact, the only show that I can really think of in the 1960s, other than soap operas and stuff, that had multi-episode storylines was actually the Beverly Hillbillies. If you ever go back and watch that, which is a great show.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
we actually mentioned the Beverly Hillbillies. So you see, people, we know our stuff. This will conclude this month's episode of the Star Trek Project. We hope you have enjoyed our discussion today. If you did, you can help us out. Like and share this review and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really want more of us, you can join our forum at sakar.freeforums.net. We would love it if you did that. Episode 4 of the Star Trek Project coming out in April. We will be discussing the animated series, both season 1 and 2. But for now, there's nothing left for me to do except thank you all. Also on behalf of our champions, and we wish you to live long and prosper. Bye.